good, y'all? It's your boy Herb.
And it's your girl Mo.
And welcome to our soon-to-be world-renowned podcast, Young, Black, and Figured It Out. What up, though?
What it do?
Whatever we tell it. How you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing, actually.
Are you?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm feeling good, too. You know why I'm feeling good?
No.
Okay, man. We got an amazing episode. I thought you'd have known that. But we got an amazing episode coming up. Y'all know how we usually do at this time.
My bad, y'all. I was like, oh, sleep? You slept well. That's what I was thinking.
Nah, we was going to our sleep. Nah, I would not be talking about that. But yeah, no, I'm feeling good though, because today's going to be an amazing episode.
Mm-hmm.
One of our most, I would say, consistently listened to episodes. People wait for this episode, so we're excited to bring this back. Typically, we would do the what do we figure out this week, but today we're not going to do that. You know why we're not going to do that, though?
We got a special
We got a special guest in the building. Let's clap it up for the special guest. Pass it off to you. Yeah, hey, in the building. Go ahead and pass it. Go ahead and introduce yourself. We're going to pass it to you.
Yeah, I love this energy. It's going to be a fun hour. I am Sean Nelms. I am a superintendent at a local school district, as well as a professor at the University of Rochester, where I oversee a research center focused on school transformation, and I'm just all over the community doing community stuff all day, which is great. I guess that's what gives me my joy, being around people. Yeah.
Dope. You hear all that dopeness? I'm just
Yeah, we're excited to talk about that dopeness too. So for folks who this might be your first time, which it shouldn't be, if it is though, we encourage you to go back and listen. This is our being black and white spaces. And so we've done just the regular part one. So much love with that. We did part two, which was healthcare edition. And then today, education, which I think right now is such an important topic based on what's going on in our society, right? Especially being black in those spaces. So, yeah, we just want to jump right into it. But before we get into talking about the specifics of being black and white spaces and education, I just want to talk about the journey, right? Like what led you to do the type of work you just explained?
Yeah, I have a long journey. So I think, for people who find their passion, it's usually rooted in something that goes back to their childhood or some type of lived experience. And for me, education has always been ingrained. We grew up in a church home environment, and my mother had us, at church all day and then all weekend and then all night. But one of the things that she afforded us was an opportunity to teach summer school, teach Sunday school. And in Sunday school, without knowing it, we were learning how to prepare lessons and how to meet with meet with our peers, how to break information down into, sizable chunks. And so there was always this modeling done in my home around helping others. And we were a very servant-driven home environment. And my mom was a block club president. She was the PTA president. Like, she was at everything. We couldn't do nothing because she was always there. And I think every job that I've had, every role that I played as a youth, if it was leading youth leadership committees or being a captain of the basketball team or going to college for education and still volunteering in the Boys and Girls Club, it was really centered to how my mom raised us. And so I think that journey has just evolved itself into working with schools throughout this region and in schools nationally. One of the best projects I think I've worked on has been a partnership with the University of Rochester, the city school district here, and the state education department. We were asked to transform a school that had been deemed persistently failing. Graduation rates in that school at the time was 29%. And it was the largest high school in the city. And so over 7 to 8 years, we've built a new system and established a new culture, and the graduation rate has surpassed 85%. So we continue to think about the systemic impact on the conditions in which people are asked to thrive in, and that becomes the center or the central focus of our work. And again, going back to my mom as a block club president and PTA president, she's always was like, we don't need outside government assistance. We should rely on, the generosity of those who've already made it. We have to create a community within ourselves, fix ourselves, and then when those resources come, we know how to use those resources more strategically. So I give her a ton of credit for laying the foundation and then all the other lived experiences along the way for solidifying them.
Yeah, that's great.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then so there's a bunch to unpack in that, which was really good. And something you actually talked about that kind of led you just to go back to your journey. Yeah. But you said you had opportunities early where it kind of shaped what you knew you really liked to do. Like you had some type of connected to, you used the word lived experience that showed you where you like to go. So you go back to that point and say that carries you to where you are now, you would say.
Absolutely. I would even say, connecting to the theme of today's show, I grew up by teachers who were just removed from the civil rights movement. And so like being anchored in my blackness was something that we just was ingrained in us throughout elementary school. And if it was Kwanzaa or understanding key principles of life. Like we had civil rights folks teaching us, and they would not allow us to diminish our history and diminish our culture in an effort to be accepted. And so I think those educators, those great educators who grounded in us a true sense of self, I see a huge disconnect from those educators to where kind of we are now, because now we're 2 or 3 generations removed from that.
Yeah.
And often we have people in front of us who really don't know the history well enough to help students become, liberated, have a liberated mindset. And so, again, those lived experiences, it's our moral and ethical obligation to make sure that when we're in spaces that are not predominantly of color, that we don't see ourselves as being less than, but we learn how to actually promote and emphasize and put some glow on who we are in those spaces. And that's a journey. That's a journey for all of us. It's been a journey for me. And I would say, being in my 40s, I'm finally probably at a place of comfort. I don't want my son and my daughters to be 40 plus before they get to that space. So I'm constantly ingraining into them the beauty of who they are as a people, and how they have to show up authentically in spaces. But before you show up authentic, you have to know your own authenticity. So that's the journey that I think I've been on since elementary, and I'm hoping that the time it takes to get there becomes less and less, so that our kids are leaving high school and college and feeling authentic about themselves.
Yes. Yes, and so I'm writing things down to follow up on, so we don't forget, right? It's like, all right, we got some stuff to follow up on. But, so really good points. And the one thing to go back, that just with the journey, to tie it back to the root of, like, who were the audience that we're trying to talk to for this particular episode, right? Like us in those spaces. You mentioned feeling comfortable enough to be authentic in predominantly white spaces where you might be one of the only or few people of color. And how do we not have it in our brain, whether subconsciously, mainly subconsciously, right, that we're less than when we're in those spaces. And you said that for you, like, working up to that journey, we're fully able to do that now, like present. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's important for a lot of us,
Yeah, so I would say in hindsight, right, I think it required, at the time I didn't realize this. So this is, kind of me speaking from someone who's experienced it. It takes so much energy to de-emphasize who you are, more than you realize. Like to consciously think about how you say certain things, to consciously think about how you move, how you position yourself. Being 6'3", who I'm standing next to, am I towering over them? And so everything that was happening for me, in my experience, someone else may have a different experience, was how do I minimize my height? How do I minimize my size? How do I minimize the tone of my voice? How do I minimize speaking too much in the crowd? How do I minimize not feeling or sounding intimidating? That's a lot of energy to do that. And the amount of energy you place into that distracts you from being smarter at your work, distracts you from having a presence, distracts you from people from seeing who you are as a leader. And so it was truly a moment where I was spending more time, and I felt myself spending more time trying to fit in than I was trying to stand out. And I think that is something that is just a journey in itself. And I remember there was a moment my younger brother said to me once. He said, I went home to Buffalo with my family. We were all there, and I took my kids with me. And my kids were like, "Dad, you're so different when you're at home with your brothers and grandma." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" This is probably 6 years ago. I said, "What do you mean?" They were like, "You talk different, you walk different, you act different, you just are so happy." And I thought about that. I didn't respond to that moment. I said, "I'm always like this." And my brother Mike, he was like, "This is your dad. This is who your dad is." And they're like, "He's not like that at home. He's always in his shirt and tie, and he's always being careful what he says." And that was like really a turning point for me, because I started thinking, like, what am I projecting to my children about being? I'm preaching to them to be authentic, but they're seeing me have two different worlds. And the world that I was at home was my authentic self, and being here, I was authentic within my home, but outside my home, tie went on, or the cameras come on for the media. Like, I felt like I had to portray the perfect Negro. To be honest, right? Because I felt like there was so much pressure for me to succeed that I had to, like, overdo everything so I didn't fail, because I didn't want to fail for the next education leader. Didn't fail for the next whoever that next was and how they viewed that.
Right.
And I'll tell you, the moment that I stopped doing that, I was able to open up more doors for myself and more doors for others because now they can listen to hip hop. I remember you and I went back and forth one time on a text message once. I can be my authentic self and talk about Jay-Z and talk about whatever I want to talk about. And people don't see that as minimizing my credentials or minimizing my impact or minimizing what I've accomplished. So there was as much of an internal journey for me as there was an external one. And I think that had a lot to do with what I perceived who I had to be to make sure that I preserve this space for others. And that's the wrong game plan. Forward. You have to be who you want to be so you can create more space for others to come into that in that environment. And that's just, again, that's my own lived experience. It's how I've came up. It's how I internalized life. It's how my mother never said to minimize that. In fact, she's the complete opposite. But it's how I internalized some of that in just ways. The other thing I would say is being around other dope black folks critically helped that too. So I would say COVID for me was extremely beneficial, because I got a chance to connect with other black professionals nationally on webinars and seminars, and I'm like, and then you look at who they're friends with, and I know you were friends with that person, and so it created this newness for me to be around like-minded people who are going through the same journey in their 30s and 40s, who are really creating this liberatory mindset at the same time, and we refuse to look back. And so it was also a good opportunity. So a podcast like this, or how we connect with other professionals who are going through it, is ideal because people don't feel like they're alone, and they can walk away with perhaps some concrete tools to really challenge who they become, or more importantly, accelerate who they want to become in the future.
And I think you talk about so many things that are important for people, especially in in the education space where you might be someone who's, whether if you're in administration or if you're a teacher, or if you're a student and you're a space that's predominantly white, I think there's this social pressure / penalty for being yourself, authentically black, right? At least the way someone might describe authentically black that way. And there's this penalty, these things that you feel that aren't necessarily spoken out loud and directly said, that almost reinforce the idea that, I need to minimize that, right? And so after a while, and I love how you put that, it actually takes more energy to do that than it does to just be yourself. And then also naming that, a lot of the times in those spaces, it's this feeling of unsafety psychologically to not do that, right? And so a way, it sounds like you and other people probably have navigated that, is finding spaces where you can be around other adult black folks or black folks in general who can validate, no, you can be yourself in these spaces, and that's okay.
Right.
And I think for the people who might be white listening to this, again, because someone might feel defensive with that, it's not, you might not intentionally be creating a space, but the space is created where, at least, and I can speak for me personally, where you feel like, man, dang, okay, I pull up blasting Nipsey or Jay, and it's all right, I got to turn the music down when I pull up based on how someone might look at me, right? Or think so. That's I think that's 100%.
The other thing too, I would say, and then I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but I would say,
apologize.
so there's a couple other things too. So also being young, black, and successful is critically important. However you define success. So I was a middle school principal at the age of 29. So I was young, and just for context, most principals at that time were in their 40s. And so not only was I black, I was young, and I was in charge of a building and leading a bunch of adults and kids. And so it's I had to accelerate my maturity. So I thought, and had to create the space that I couldn't mess up. Because once you go to the top in your profession, at that time I thought that was the top, you really want to maintain that. And so you do everything not to screw it up. Even when you watch your colleagues do the most nonsensical things and get promoted for doing those things, right?
Repeatedly.
So I'm like, how do you get away with that? So that's also a factor as well. The other thing I would say is just how I just want to be careful that I'm not centering whiteness in this discussion, because although the vast majority of teachers in the country are white females, that has direct impact with desegregation when black teachers lost their jobs in these integrated schools. and then white women who were housewives became educated and entered the teaching workforce. That's how like education became a predominantly white female space. It was really a direct connection to the desegregation of schools. But the vast majority of kids that I support and their families are black and brown.
100%.
So if you think about spaces, our space is actually a black and brown space
Right.
that has a layer of authority that happens to be white.
100%.
And then whoever leadership around that, if it's a school board, whatever, may differ. So I'm also in that attempt and in that journey to be authentic. I have to redefine in my head, like what is a white space or a brown space? Does that exist? And for me, that space only exists if you've internalized it that way. Because I might be one of 20 in the room, but that doesn't mean that space is a white space, because I can dominate with my one in that 20 in the room. I can control that space if I choose to. So, or I can intentionally sit back and listen.
Right.
And so I also want people to think about, when you think about spaces, think about the impact of you in that space. And there are moments you want to be in a space as an observer and a listener. And there are times you want to go in there and you want to disrupt them to really surface the real issues. And as long as you're conscious around what your purpose is in that space, then the space will never be defined for you. You're constantly defining that space for yourself. And that's just a part of being liberated in your mental construct. So that's something, again, that I would encourage the listeners to do, is to think about how you enter and exit spaces in the way that you're controlling your impact and your emotions and how in that space, even if that means you remain silent.
Yeah.
You know, you're still controlling your silence. And I think, and it's not being controlled for you. So again, that's just, I'm a little older now and I've done this for a little bit, but that's kind of been this journey that I didn't have these conversations as a 29-year-old principal with anybody of color who was successful and thinking about how to navigate that. So it was kind of, I made up as I went. And the easiest thing for me at the time to do was to be quiet and then just be me at home.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as easy as I thought. It was quite harmful.
Yeah. And there's kind of like this internal battle around that too that happens, where, because you feel that, I think sometimes in a visceral way, like, man, that like you almost are being one way in one space, and it's a cognitive dissonance in a way. Like you can feel that really pressing up against you. So and even in my workspace now, as you're talking, it's a lot of amens. I'm like, hey, I hear that. It's like, yeah, you talking, yeah, this is good. You're talking my language right now. So yeah, and then the other thing you mentioned too, just to go back, because I think the interpersonal conversation we're having now stems or rubs right up against and kind of intersects with something you mentioned earlier, which is when you came in and worked in the ones, I think it was a school or a system, you said we addressed the structures first that affected the people, not just not to go at the people, right? Because it's these systems that create the environment where people have to excel or succeed or expected to, right? Yeah. And so I know that's important, like those structures. Can you speak to how you actually did that and what that actually looks like?
So first, I think that any time you're going into a setting that's familiar or unfamiliar, you have to really think about, like, how did this space come to be, right? So some would say you have to ask the question, what happened as opposed to what's wrong. You know, if you say what's wrong and you focus on those who are in the now, and you start to blame people for that structure, you can say in education, it could be the kids or the families or bad teachers or bad administrators. But if you start with the question, what happened, it forces you to try to think about, like why are there no kids in the AP advanced placement courses? Why, when I walk into the in-school suspension room, it's all black females? You know, fill in the blanks, whatever that is. And then you start asking specific questions around that. And the deeper you get, you start to figure out that some of those systems and results of those systems were intentional.
Right.
So you have to go back and then you have to address the intent of that structure. The other thing, too, is when you're changing systems like that, you have to understand that there are those who benefited from that structure that still may be in authoritative positions.
Right.
So how do you then communicate the disconnect between where people want to be and where they currently are, when there might be people who created that without even knowing that their good intentions or their well thought out plans 10 years ago would have this impact.
Right.
Just like you think about, mass incarceration. There were black and white and all type of folks saying, yep, we got a lot more people up. not realizing that the impact of that was going to be
Right.
the destruction of families within the community
Right.
over minor offenses.
Right.
So again, it's important to go back and look and to study the environment before you build and move forward. And I think that we can then have a strong voice in that as too, and talking about how we experience it, being careful not to represent all Black voices. Like, so even today I said, this is my lived experience.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to talk about and imply what happened to me with every other Black person in the country, because we're all individuals.
Right.
And so being authentic is accepting and promoting your individuality as well. You know, and I think that becomes critically important in those space. So I would say for structures, I always go back and ask those questions. I want to hear from the people first. So similar to an interview, you kind of walk in and say, you know, ask people, what is your desire state for this setting to be? What would you, if an ideal space, what would it look like? Then what's impeding that from happening? What would be my role in helping to resolve that? And then the last question is, what is your role and commitment?
Right.
Into supporting that move and to keep it and make it sustainable.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, a individual leader or a single heroic figure can never change a system. It has to be established through this like interpersonal accountability construct where everyone owns the success and the failure equally. But that can only happen if we're all anchored into the same moral purpose of that place, or the same mission and vision process. We have to be anchored in something that we can go back to, so it doesn't become a conflict personally.
Right.
It has to be a conflict about the systems and structures that we're setting up to get X results. And in that conversation, at the core must be inclusivity.
Right.
Right.
And not meaning you come into my space and be included. That's centering, whatever dominant culture is in that space, or perceived dominant culture in that space. I'm saying inclusivity, meaning that everyone comes to the table with their own authentic selves, and then the environment is created around that, which means the environment has to constantly evolve. Because as people enter and exit, the culture and climate should also change.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think that's just something we have to be conscious about. And I think that's the whole evolution of life. And I think that's, people should never feel guilty about where they are. I have no guilt in how I led as a young leader, because that's where I was on that part of my journey. I shouldn't feel guilty about that. But I have a responsibility to share that, and someone can take that and apply it or not. It might not be applicable to them. But I can tell you, for the most part, if you are Black and intelligent and you're leading and you're in spaces where you're not feeling comfortable, a lot of these things are applicable. And I would say truly start with self.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from you yet. Let me interview you.
Oh my gosh. I swear, listening to you had me like, where were you a couple of years ago? Like when I started out working in schools, and the level of muting I did. And it wasn't even intentional quietness to sit back and observe. It was like feeling shut down for whatever I had to say, and like everything y'all were saying with the majority may look like me because of the population we serve, or the parents or whoever, but who has control or who has the power does not. And the lack of understanding in what I am stating, or why this is important, or why I'm advocating for it, when that is repeatedly shut down, there comes a point when you just stop trying, right? And then you said with that support, like during the COVID shutdown, you had all these different meetings and you met these people, and that level of support to see us and pushing us. And I'm like, when you're by yourself in that, and you don't have that support, and you don't know where to turn or how to turn, and you think, well, if I just do my small part, maybe that'll make a difference. But at the same time, you feel so defeated. Every day you go home, it's like, did I even do anything today? Could I do more? And then maybe being forced into doing things that don't match. Or especially in this month, how that goes. Different corporations will be like, where are our Black people? Diversity, Black History Month. It's your turn. This is your time to shine. It's like, this is the only time you see me. This is the
and
only
will
thing
you
I
plan
can,
it?
Will
you plan the month?
It's like all of a sudden I have all this authority just for this. No other parts. There's so many I think levels to it, and the hardest thing I found is shifting the curriculum, because that is also part of the system where if you can't influence that, how can you push these beautiful brown babies to see their authentic selves, or even understand what that looks like? And then if you aren't allowed to do it yourself, are you even able to show or promote or model like you stated? So, I mean, I'm over here just going through it.
So I'm interviewing. But you have, I think it's beautiful. You talked about your mental health background and how you're supporting this community. what advice would you give people now that you wish you would have given yourself when you were in that muted state?
Oh,
That's a good question.
Great question. Oh Lord. Have the difficult conversation. I went through a lot of things, and I was about to cry at some point. So I'm glad no one called on me early. Lord knows, it was hard reliving some situations and recognizing the lack of understanding. Like, they don't know sometimes that they're subtly doing or saying things that is like coming to the core of who you are. And my original identity is always going to be Black. So I would push or tell or encourage others to have the difficult conversation early. Like, it doesn't need to be aggressive or rude, because we already know how we can be seen just by, our voice going a little louder, or we're stating words in a non-professional way. But I think it's best to be as clear as possible that what was said or what was done didn't sit well with you, regardless of how that person receives it or how, if they believe you or not. The fact is, you state it and you keep stating it, because you can't ignore that for very long.
Right.
And I did not do that early enough. When I did, though, I did see changes, which I appreciate, but those first couple of years was rough.
And I would just add to that, and I would also add, like, don't defend how it made you feel, right? Like, this is how it made me feel. So I'm not going to debate you if I should not have felt that way.
Right.
But also be open to the response, so, and I think anyone who is authentically trying to help you be authentic in that space, or allow you to be, whatever, not allow is kind of, again, position someone else to get permission to, but you know what I'm saying? I think sometimes, because of our own experiences, we might interpret something in a way it wasn't intended.
Right.
So I can still tell you it made me feel a certain way. And now that you know, I expect you to change that. But when they say, well, I didn't know, tell me how could you have not known that?
Right.
Like, that's a very helpful conversation for the person and for you. Say, wow, like so one of the things I noticed over the last few years is that, especially after the last election, and the brazen ness of individuals who just said the most dumb things about race and racial perspectives, is that there are a lot of white folks who I hung out with who, honestly, all good intentions, good people around my kids, who had no idea the extent to which some of these things were impacted. I watched someone today on Facebook, because last night, the release of the tape from Memphis was out. I refused to watch it. I'm not watching it, right? No. But I watched people on Facebook today on these chats with people who are woke. What are you guys talking about? Why is everyone so upset today? Having no idea what happened. It's not even, it doesn't come from their social feed.
Right.
It's not talked about in their closed communities. Right. Like, it's to us, it is like a historic moment. And to them, it is on the same news thread, perhaps missed, as Nancy Pelosi's husband being attacked by a hammer. Like, it's like, like there, it doesn't elevate to any emotional place where it's like, that's wrong. It's something else happened in the world. And so I have to say to them, wow, like that, like if it's not something that is brought to their attention, how could I expect them to know the repeated nature of these issues and how it makes me feel?
Right.
So there's that gentle balance. I'm not giving them an excuse, but I'm also saying there might be a reason. That gets back to the root cause we talked about earlier. Their journey may have never been forced to deal with these issues. They may have never been to think about how people of color in their spaces may or may not feel authentic and accepted in that space. Their journey, they may have never worked with anyone of color before. So how to engage in ways that are just normal to them, they got to do something exceptional. And so I think about that too. Everyone's on a journey, and everyone has something that has triggered their ability to open up spaces, even open up their own hearts, and we have to honor that. We don't have to excuse it either.
And it's something with that too, that actually, so that kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier, especially in the education space. So when I make this statement, I'm flashing back to when I was working in higher education.
All right.
So that right there, like the fact that you would have to explain or have to justify or feel like you have to or have to help educate on why this is important to me. It's hard for me. I remember we were in, because I'm working in healthcare, and the Buffalo, right? hate crime, right, happened, and I'm like, hey, we need to make a statement,
Right.
right? And it was like urgent to me, like we need to say something. Not just the fact we need to make a statement, but for me, it was I want to say something to the people who are here to say I see you and I am mourning with you as well. For the folks who are working there who I know feel that, but the fact of having to explain why that's so important,
Yeah.
like that is difficult in itself, and that's kind of like the silent social penalty I mentioned before. It's like, all right, if I have to explain that and kind of get aside of it, not that folks did that, folks heard me, but if I have to do it and it's not just understood, that's kind of like a silent, all right, in this space, what is the safety like if I have to be able to say that? And then if I flash back to higher education, when situations like that would happen, especially I'm thinking about for some folks, it was a racial reckoning around George Floyd and all of those things.
Right.
When I think if you're one of the few black leaders in that space, and you're, in a sense, you feel responsibility for the folks who are like the black students who are there, there's a weight around not just how do I think about my own safety and feeling, but how am I bringing along or helping folks there actually feel seen and valued and heard. And I think that weighs on a lot of, I think, professionals who are educators or administrators, whatever it might be, in places that are at least, I think, demographically predominantly white, right?
It's funny. I told someone once. I said it was another. I think it might have been around the George Floyd incident. I said to someone, a white friend of mine, said, "Man, I feel so bad for you, man. This stuff just keeps happening." And I said to him, I said, "Please don't tell me you feel bad for me ever again." I said, "Tell me you feel bad when it feels and hurts as much as it hurts me that it hurts you."
Right.
I said, "That's when I know you get it."
Right.
And again, love the brother, right? And I knew what he was saying,
Right.
and but with him, I can express it differently in ways. And I said, because it makes me think about our friendship when it's always I feel bad for you, but now I'm going to leave that emotion there. I'm going to go back and watch the football game. I'm going to go back and I'm going to right. So I think the hard part about being in these spaces at times is that we make assumptions that people don't feel it the same way. And how could they not feel it? How could this not be triggering for them? How could they concentrate today? Don't ask me no question at 9 o'clock in the morning when the tape was released at 8 a.m., right? So we walk in there with like armed, right? And as I said earlier, the more you focus on that, the less you are effective in terms of what you're paid to do. Right. And so there's that balance, right? And so you have to figure out what that is, what that means for you. But as a young and gifted professional and trying to figure it out, I think you have to give yourself space for that.
Yeah.
To say, why am I feeling like I have to carry this burden in this space? Is it because the space isn't carrying it for me? Right. Or is this a space for me to carry it into? You know, so you have to really think about that. You can't be liberated if you're constantly carrying baggage. So I didn't watch the video. I'm not gonna watch the video. I told my son he bet not watch the video. Yeah. I said, because you have to ask yourself before you watch it, why am I watching it? Right. And how is it gonna make me better as a result of watching it? Right. Some are watching it for entertainment. Yeah. Purposes, to be honest, right? So they can repost it and get likes. Yeah. Some people are watching it to fuel anger they already have inside of them. It just affirms their hatred, and it's just gonna fuel them to do and respond in different ways. Some are watching it as a learning experience. Yeah. Right. But you have to ask yourself, like, why am I entering these spaces and these conversations, and what do I hope to get out of it? Absolutely. And then how do I process it, you know, in a constructive way after that? The reason why I know we're talking about the workplace, but the reason why I'm mentioning that is if you don't do that and you watch that video on Saturday and you don't process it Sunday, and someone says something ignorant on Monday,
oh yeah, you're turned up.
You're gonna tick, and it's gonna be you looking like,
what's wrong with brother? Oh,
what happened to him over the weekend? Yeah. What's wrong with you? Are you okay? You know. Yeah,
that's right.
Right. And they honestly, because their weekend was not filled with that anger.
And then sometimes, even if you try to process it, it's not that it's gone.
Right.
It's still kind of
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you may walk into the workplace
Yeah.
trying to be normal and trying to stay like positive, but it's still there. And unfortunately, because these things keep happening, sometimes it's like you're holding a purse or a book bag. Like there's just this extra weight that's not necessary. And it's a way of, if someone does say something, checking yourself in that moment and recognizing, is it them or is it me right now? What am I feeling? Where is this coming from?
That's when you tune into your podcast on the way to work. Right? You listen and say, all right, I'm going to arm myself today, right? So you are arming people on their way into work so they can think about, all right, what they say about that?
Right. I love that. Sometimes people aren't even saying anything ignorant as much as they're trying to be, kind or sweet or be like, I know this was probably a rough weekend. And even that could just feel annoying because it's like, come on now.
Let me rock. No, so there's a couple of things I definitely want to go back to, like that we want to circle back to. That's not necessarily about this topic, but it's so good though. I think the idea of it was, you saw the circle? It would have to circle on back, y'all. You know how we gotta talk with my hands. But the you had mentioned, and this is me putting this in the notes to come back to the parking lots, they say. But you had mentioned like the pressure early on, like being young in your career, the pressure to almost have to not mess up because you got to a certain height. Right. And so I'll tell you, I was just having a conversation with one of my friends back home, and we grew up, like, it was like four of us. We all grew up from high school. We still connect. We talk once a month, do like this power conversation, but we always in a group chat. And he was talking about, we were talking about success, and he was asking me about where I am now and the process and like, what's the mindset. We was having a real good conversation. And I said, honestly, like the pressure of getting to a certain height is different than the pressure of being afraid of falling. Like that almost is more pressure than I've ever, especially as a black man, where you feel like there's like it's a legacy you're carrying. Yeah. There's a certain weight of people looking at you of, is this person gonna mess up?
Right.
And you walk into a room and you almost, it's internal, but you feel like I'm representing especially in my role as a chief diversity officer and like what that actually means, right? And I've actually started to unpack like, what is that role and what is that doing to people?
Right.
To the people in it, right? So that what you mentioned, like the height for like that fear, I think it's greater than the fear of not making it to a certain level. So that's something for sure. I'm like, oh, we're going to have to bring, that might be a whole nother episode.
But I would say, and part of that is, that's what I said earlier. I said, however you define success.
Right.
And I was very careful about that because I think some people define success as a position.
Right.
Oh, I got the title.
Right.
Right. Some people define it by salary.
Right.
Until you work with somebody who makes twice the amount. And you're like, I thought I was getting paid. You're like, I love what Shaq said. I'm rich, but I'm not wealthy.
Right.
The owner of the team is wealthy. Right. So some people define it by the type of influence or power it might give you in certain spaces. So you have to really define what that is for you. And I think it changes with age. I think it changes with, it's influenced by if you grew up in poverty.
Yeah.
You grew up in poverty, 50,000 is a lot.
Yeah.
Right. You grew up in middle school family, 50,000 is not. It's so it really depends on how you frame that. So so people have to first define what success is for them. And it's going to look different for everyone.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like, I think the most successful leaders define success by impact. And that's what you were getting at.
Yeah.
So how am I going to leverage this position I'm in to impact an entire, organization, an entire culture, whatever that is.
Right.
In leadership, you have to define that. And I would much rather have, we get this debate with some of my frat brothers. I'm like, I'd much rather have influence than power.
Yeah.
They're like, well, you get power, you get influence. I said, you can have power and actually have no influence.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I think, you can have that debate internally. That's another conversation to have. But I would take influence any day because I know that whatever impact, hopefully positive impact that comes from that could last generations. If power is defined by position, and someone could argue it's not, then the minute that you get fired, then you have to question, are you now powerless?
Right.
And I would say if you are, then you didn't do the real internal work.
Right.
Because a position is going to never make me feel powerless.
Right.
So I think those are also discussions, for young professionals, is to really, really, really think about what drives you. Money is good, right? So I'm not saying don't make that. Right. I'm saying, but that's as part of the journey.
Right.
I would say having the title and getting the executive suite. That if you just want to have a corner office, You know,
Go for it. Right.
go
Do you.
for it, right? But I guarantee you, there's a lot of corners. There's 4 corners in that building.
Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah.
I just think that there are opportunities for people to redefine and take the time to redefine again their presence in spaces, what drives them, because if you're gonna be driven by money and you're gonna constantly grind, you're not gonna enjoy life.
Yeah.
You know, ideally you'll be able to grind, have influence, and get paid for and get and have you get paid the value
Yes.
of who you are. And I think that would be ideal. But you have to have some type of journey and roadmap set out for you. I just did this with my daughter. She's probably gonna get mad at me for doing this when she listens.
Hey, shout out.
But we sat down and I said to her, like, doing her budget, talk about, you know, next phase of her life. I said, how much do you have budgeted for your social life? She goes, what do you mean? I said, you can't be 25 and just grinding. You have to have a budget per month for you to go do something social. I don't care if it's to go to a play, if it's to go with your girlfriends to dinner. Like, what is your investment in you each month that makes working worth it? And she was like, Dad, you're right, because I just be grinding. I'm like, you're not going to enjoy life that way. So,
Sound like you talking to me, but go ahead.
I was trying not to look at you because I know you know that's
I know you about to talk. Hey, you heard him say it.
Like, did you make that vacation yet?
Jason, that's funny. Yeah,
You can.
yeah, that's
It's true.
dope.
she's 25 and she's grinding, and I love her grind, but I'm like, you need to, you have to enjoy. There's got to be a balance
Right.
in your life too, or you're not going to show up in those other spaces healthy.
Yeah, and that's dope
Yeah.
because like you can speak to that in a visceral way. Like you, like I've done that, or you know, looked at that, and so yeah.
Yeah, that's why kids call me cheap. They're like that. You ain't spend no money growing up. I said, yeah. I said, I was poor. Y'all gonna be poor too. And then they're like, you're not poor no more. I Googled you, Dad. I Googled your salary. but
I looked at the
right,
990.
right. So what was really happening is that I was projecting them like not to enjoy life, and that you work to like create generational wealth.
Yeah.
But generational wealth is not just a monetary thing. Again, 20s, 30s, generational wealth meant they're going to have college paid for, they're going to be set. When I die, they're going to get my life insurance. Everything was like, when I'm gone, they're going to enjoy all this. That was like my mission. That was like my focus. Like, they're going to be set up when I'm gone. That's, when you don't come from much, that becomes your priority.
Right.
Absolutely.
As you get older, you're like, generational wealth is also mental health. It's also experiential, taking them on trips, stamping their passports. And so how I define generational wealth now is different than it was 10 years ago. But I couldn't even envision what it was going to look like in my 40s, because I never seen that much money. I never seen that much access. I never seen any of that. And we don't talk about money at all in the Black community. We do that.
Yeah.
And so now it's different because I'm able to show them the benefits of grinding.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm grinding all the time and my kids never see the benefits of it, then it devoids all the hard work. And that's what was happening. Now they see when we're on vacation and dad dips off to go do some emails or Zoom, it's because it's adding to this experience for y'all.
Right.
Right? Or when dad dips off to go do a consulting gig, and I know it's supposed to be Saturday, but it's early in the morning. That benefits you later on when you're asking me for some new sneakers that just dropped. Right?
Right.
And making those real connections. But again, that's teaching my kids the authentic nature of your own professional and personal growth by doing that. And so they respected when I was cheap dad. They respect even more the value of now they can do things because I've been able to invest in them, because I've saved enough to do that. And I hope they'll invest in realizing later on that when I'm no longer here, that it's their responsibility to do that for their kids, right? So teach them the importance of money, teach them the importance of mental health and balance, but also leave something for the next generation to build off of so they're better. That's also a lesson for young Black professionals in these spaces is how are you positioning yourself so that you can have this balance professionally and personally. You got to get out there. You got to go travel. You got to do your conferences. You have to do all that because then you can open up those spaces. So when someone else comes along after you and they ask you about, I just got this job, doc, and you can say to them, make sure you go invest this right now right? That helps them be authentic in that space too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're watching their colleagues traveling all the time. They're figuring out, I make more than, listen, my secretary was traveling more than I was when I was a principal.
Right.
Like, how do I make 3 times your salary? And you got a house on a lake, a cottage, and you traveling all the time. I'm like, yo, this game is kind of messed up, right? But it's because it was passed down to her. So part of putting, we're bird walking here, but part of putting Black folks in these spaces at ease is giving them the ability to have this mental health balance,
Yeah.
this professional balance,
Yeah.
and this personal one all at the same time. Like showing them and demonstrating and modeling how to do that.
Absolutely.
And we don't always do that when you're the first one.
Right.
Yeah. Ooh, now that's that again. That's another part. The first one, 'cause
Clearly,
that's it.
You're clearly learning as you go,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
failing and tripping and falling and picking yourself back up and trying again. It's like,
Yeah.
Do you so back to the education piece about that though? Because I think this is all good because this is education.
That's right.
I'm learning a lot.
Yeah,
We're
this is
learning.
good.
We're learning.
Yeah, hey, man, this is a Gems podcast.
Right.
So in the educational settings, and I didn't get a chance to ask this yet, but I want to say, do you feel like the education, and you kind of answered this already, but is the educational systems and structures the way it is now, traditionally, right, in our spaces, is that, as people would define it, because we talked about what a white space is, but would you define that as a white structure, system, or space?
Man, you know, I'm struggling with centering that
Yes.
because I would
We'll talk
say,
about that because that's important. Like,
yeah.
you know.
So I would say, if it is, it's because we've allowed it to. So when you have a school district, we're going to talk about Rochester, for example, right? When you have a school district, Rochester City, because there's a lot of schools in Monroe County, when you have 90% of the kids are Black and brown, whatever that percentage is somewhere near that number, then if we allow it to be that way, it's because the 90% allowed it to be that way. So how do we collaborate, coalesce in ways that we elect board members, in this case, that's how the structure is here, to make sure that that space is not anti them or not opposite them. And so I would say anything that is characterized as a white space or whatever dominant culture exists in that particular environment, it's only that way if you allow it to be.
Right.
And it may not mean physically changing who's in front of you,
Right.
but it will mean structurally changing how those people engage with you who are in front of you. So if we want to have anti-racist curriculum in this district and every teacher has to teach it, then you can ensure that that's going to happen because that's going to be mandated as part of your curricular framework. You mentioned curriculum earlier, so I'll use that as an example. If you don't mandate that and you don't have the structures to create it and to implement it, then now you leave up to people to decide if they want to do it or not. There's no expectation. So I would say that the education space in Rochester in particular, particularly how it was at East when the graduation rate was 29%, most definitely de-centered our Black and brown
Gotcha.
and multicultural youth.
Yeah.
And so we had to work hard to center them. You know, we even having the mural of Malcolm X, you know, and on the school, and having a project with Sean Dunwoody that shows Black and brown leaders, international, nationally, and local, so they can see themselves in our school was critically important. And then changing what they learn and how they learn it, not as like these ancillary, go take a women's study course, no, it's got to be in the core what every kid gets, not just as an elective. So I would say that the school system or school systems will only be what the community allows them to be.
Yeah.
And so, and to the extent that we allow that to happen, then yes, it will be an environment that decenters our Black and brown youth.
Yeah.
And then by default, it centers another perspective. In this case, it could be a white perspective.
Right.
But I like to flip the conversation.
Yeah.
Because if we play defense on white center spaces, we'll never address the real problem. We have to constantly ask ourselves, what happened that from the time I was taught by those first generation folks from the civil rights movement, what happened from that type of education to where we are now, when those individuals became silenced and marginalized, and how do we revisit that type of environment moving forward? It shouldn't take a national civil rights movement to do that. I think we are educated enough about our history to say if we don't do this, this is the path we're going to go down. So so again, so as we center us, as we center others in that community, whatever that community is made up of, the key question is, why do we allow ourselves to be silenced and marginalized and sometimes erased without like a visceral reaction and response and a coordinated approach to change that?
Yeah, that's good. So that make a lot of sense, and I appreciate the way you're framing the conversation around not censoring. In this case, just for me, because it's important in my mind, but not censoring whiteness, right? How do we censor the conversation around us, right, and what that is? And if we've allowed it, and I appreciate the way you say that, because that's power in that statement. If we've allowed it, how do we not go forward and do that? So I appreciate that definition. And then the other question I had from what you were saying earlier, you talked about the importance of education around like some of the things that go along with schooling education, but also like a holistic approach to that. Like what are sort of mental health and financial and all of the things that go along with being a whole person. Wellness. The wellness. How do we, do you think that's happening from your experience and what you're saying? Those broader topics are being touched on in spaces like school.
I would say no. I don't think nearly well enough. I mean, there are companies that are popping up with financial literacy and STEM, and I mean, so there are efforts to do that, right? And there are people who are doing it in some school systems better than others. Right. There's a lot of work for us to do some things well, and other things we can do better. But I also think, so I think about education more broadly, like yourself, higher ed. Then you have like real life education, right? So I think our kids. Even if the kids got it in 8th grade, we took a financial literacy course in 8th grade. Let's say a kid took this amazing course, right? The best course you can imagine. But those ideas and principles aren't reinforced between 9 through 12 at home, in the community, and also in school. They become this like moment in time experience. So so educating the community and the adults in the community to be prepared to have those conversations is equally important. So I'll talk about financial literacy for a moment. So my partner and I, like she has a whole different lived experience. She's a New Yorker from Queens, She's a
not Brooklyn though.
Yeah. She's still amazing.
Yeah, she's still amazing, right?
She's a queen.
Yeah, she's a queen. She's a queen, right?
Right.
But I remember when her and I first started like dating, and we would she'd talk about her travels and and she would talk about just different things in life that I hadn't experienced that I perhaps should have. And so we talked about, let's talk about how we're going to build together financially. And I said to her, like, I have money. I'm a novice at how to make it grow and how to use it and be smart about it. I said, I just haven't really had those conversations, right? Credit great. I have a 403B. I have savings. But I mean, it really wasn't something that we talked about. I didn't have anyone to really feel safe to talk about. And my parents weren't wealthy, and so I'm not going to come to them with numbers that I know they've never seen and make them feel bad.
Right.
At least I felt that way.
Yeah.
Right? So we were talking, and she's like, "Yo, let's just start with like our credit card health. Both have great credit. I got an Amex card. She has an Amex card. We travel. I have a Delta on mine. Hers is a normal one. And we just like messed around for a year on travel and points and this and that. And our statuses kept growing as we did it, and we made some very conscious decisions about what we were going to do. And it was so amazing that I started telling all my friends, like, yo, like, if you want to maximize your credit, this is what you do. I became like the student to the teacher, like overnight, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And to a point where we recorded, I'll send it to y'all. We recorded for our friends with them on a Zoom how to maximize their credit in ways that, some knew about it, but a lot of adults who we were talking to had no idea how to do that. These are like people in like top positions in the community or top positions in their company who were for the first time having these conversations. And it really made me think about, even when we are successful, however you define that, there's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
And when you don't have a person of color to speak to about it, you're sometimes embarrassed to mention it. So going back to my secretary, yes, she had a cottage, right, on a lake.
Yeah.
It was passed down for 3 generations, I found out later.
Yeah.
She splits it with 6 of her like family members, so she gets a weekend, right? So here I am. My initial response is like, man, I can't even afford that. Like, I'm feeling bad and embarrassed that I'm not giving my kids that experience.
Yeah.
And then I later found out, 6 of y'all, you get 1 week, and this is how much you pay per year. I can do that with my siblings.
Yeah.
And so it it evolved over time. So I say that to say, so education happens in the classroom, yes, but it has to happen in our community as well. So there's a bridge between what the kids are learning and what they can express and talk about to adults in their life.
Yeah.
So that it becomes a family
Yeah.
family conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe not family with your nuclear family, it could be play cousins, whatever.
Yeah. Right.
But you have people, the 4 guys you come up with, right?
Yeah.
How often do you think about do you talk about finances and being real about that? Talk about debt and good debt. So when I hear education, and I've been in this space at East for 8 years, what I'm realizing is that the more I educate the parents, the better the kids do.
Right.
Educate them on like graduation outcomes, FAFSA forms, what happens next, how much your kid can make if they enter this field. Like the better parents are to better informed parents are to be able to ask more thoughtful questions, the better kids do.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's an and conversation. We have to do better in schools across the country, but we have to do just as much in the community with making sure that we're having safe spaces to have these conversations.
Yeah.
My sister, so she calls me, she gets the video, and she watches it, and I'm like, that's dope. My sister watched it, right? And she was like, hey, I have like X amount of dollars in this savings account. And I said, well, is it like a high yield money market or is it just a savings account? And she got like money in there, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you're making like 0.3% on that money. Like 0.3. I said, do you understand how you can like how much money you've lost over the last like 5 years? She's like, what are you talking about? So I said, go to your bank, show them your money, and you talk to the manager and say, first of all, you show your displeasure that you've had this running balance for 5 years in this bank, and not one teller has told you to move it into a high yield money market. Especially if you can put it over there, you're not going to touch it for a year. And I said, so you go on and you go on there and say that they did a bad job informing you, and you're considering moving your money to another bank, right? She got all the services she needed, because they don't do that. Whereas when I walked to my bank the first time, there was this young African American teller was like, she's like, Dr. Nelms, you might want to move some of that money into this other account because this has been your flat rate, and you can get a higher yield if you move it. No one's ever had that conversation with me. She just kind of said it one day, and I'm like, all right, let me see what you're doing, So we moved it, and it has worked. And so I just think it's those conversations too that become liberated for those who are trying to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Right? It provides different opportunities, different experiences for you. So
Creates
I know
that
we started with education way over here, and we were talking about money all the way over
But
here.
it's all connected though.
But I think for your audience, I think it's really important for them.
Yeah, no, that's good. We appreciate where that's going though.
Right.
Like, that's where it needs to be. Like, this is education all around. What you about to say?
No, I was just saying that creates that balance. Like if the schools as well as the community are doing their parts, then the whole child, the whole
It's a
holistic
community
approach,
education.
They get that peace of mind as well. That makes perfect
And
sense.
when you mentioned about like the education on the parents, you probably have experienced that
Yeah.
when you were working on education, and the importance of that. So you probably can add to that too, like
Yeah, and he's absolutely right because I've noticed the biggest thing for me was changing my field so that I can be more involved with parents because if you can help support the family and get the parents on board, the kids will do so much better.
Right.
They thrive in a different way. And a lot of it I notice is parents just not understanding. And the schools, unfortunately, don't do the best job explaining as well or taking the time really to like break it down and express what this means and how this can support your child. And, just the stigmas and the what you think that meant or how it was when you were a kid, all that gets in the way. And so trying to bring those barriers down is like the biggest thing. I love it.
Yeah, and I think what I took from that too is like the education, the way it actually, like what education actually means and the way it works. It's like it's starting in, like, so I mentioned schools, and like that's a part of it. Like there's like this continual all spaces education that people are getting, regardless. That all of that should, or in the best case scenario, is reinforcing itself, right?
Yeah.
As folks experience that. So yeah, that's good.
I keep staring at your hoodie because it's dope, by the
Why,
way.
thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
but it keeps if I have my notes, I'm a writer when I I keep saying like you are both promoting the process of being better. Like your branding, the purpose of the podcast, and I'm first of all I'm grateful for being on the show, one, but two, like I am excited about what's to come for our future. Like I'm noticeably older than y'all. You know, I don't feel that much older. I was called an OG at the gym the other day, which made me a little nervous. But I'm like, OG, what you talking about, man? You know? I mean, I get off the bench a little slow or what? I don't know what it was, right? But
Not the OG.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I ain't that status yet. But I will say that honestly, like, I am encouraged because you all have access to a world of Black professionals that I did not have access to. It wasn't in my neighborhood because we grew up in poverty. They were great people, but I'm talking about at a different income, different education level. And that's not shaming them. I'm just saying that wasn't present, right? We were coming through a generation where people in my family were for the first time going to college and taking on non-service related professions. And you all have access to all that right now, if it's digitally or in person. And I believe that your generation is actually more bold about asking these questions and not embarrassed to ask them. So for me, it is very encouraging, but it's also now a great responsibility on you to share that with the generation that you're better connected to. When I speak to a kid now, I know I'm the old dude speaking to him. Like, man, how do you know? You know, and no matter what happened in my youth, they're like, how do you know? I'm too far removed. If y'all say it, you know, it has a different meaning. It has a different tone, and I acknowledge that. So I just think your generation is the perfect bridge between bringing back what the OGs and the old heads did back in the day, and acknowledging where the young kids are now, and really creating space for both. I think there are people who are at the other end of the older end of the spectrum that never gave up the power and they kept it too long, and they didn't build the next generation. And so there's a huge disconnect. And I think there's a generation of youth who don't think there are people out there who understand them. And I believe both of you, and the people that your listeners and the folks who are trying to find their authentic selves can play and must play a critical role in this work. So, I mean, I know that's great pressure. But I think I appreciate you even holding spaces like this to start the conversations and to provide a path forward. I really do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I ain't gonna lie, I think that's the part where it's time to, that's where we're gonna end that. Listen, no surprises. Look, appreciate that. And honestly, we appreciate you you being here and sharing like your knowledge, your experience. And I think we definitely feel like being able, like, doing that is a vulnerability in itself. So we appreciate it. And just the amount of like wisdom and gems in this podcast, great. Yeah, definitely appreciate you for sure.
Thank you too.
All right, but listen.
We grew before their eyes.
You know, like, we at another level. I'm about to go to the bank right now. What do you say, money market account? I mean, what's going on? But no, well, listen, people might be listening right now thinking, what in the world they talking about? Look, we might be right.
We might be wrong.
But at the end of the day,
we just young, black, and figuring it out.
Tough.
On the track, boy.